Was the Garden of Eden even on planet Earth? I truly don't think so. This is going to be an hour-long video about God, aliens, the supernatural, mythological gods, all the above, Anunnaki, all kinds of crazy stuff. Lock in, get whatever you need, get comfortable. Here we go. So this is something that I want to be very open with at the very beginning here. I'm not saying any of these are correct. We're just going to be talking about the abnormalities and the similarities between tons of different real-life events that we know have happened, different biblical events, different religious events, and the ancient astronaut, ancient alien theory out there, okay? If you're not interested in this stuff, now's the time to scroll instead of getting yourself worked up in the comments like I know half of you are going to do. So the first thing I want to talk about is in the Bible, we have the first man that was Adam, right? Well, the ancient Mesopotamians also said their first man was named Adamu, A-D-A-M-U. And this was written down thousands of years before anybody thought about writing anything down in the Bible. So I think that is really neat that we have a real life event that we know for sure happened as far as, what historians can see. And that's very important that you listen to what I'm saying. That historians can see. We can track something that we know historians can see. And then the Bible correlates with that and says Adam. Now, what I think is interesting about this, when you get into, we don't know different things that have happened or have not happened. We have to speculate on everything because I believe our history's been altered multiple times. I believe that the Bible has been edited and revised so many times that it's like playing the telephone game. We know that almost half of the books of the Bible are actually not included in the modern day Bible, especially the King James, which is the most popular version, which I did a whole video on how the King James Bible is a slap in everybody's face and how it is a real disgrace for the reason why it was created in the first place. Not saying the Bible was, saying specifically the King James versions. How many words have known to have been swapped and changed to fit the narrative at the time that when the King James Bible was being written, with the political history and the struggle of power that was going on at the time. So you have to take everything I want to say with a grain of salt because you can only go off so much. You can do all the research you want to. You have to face the facts that some history has been altered and is lost forever, and we'll never be able to get that back. That's just the facts of the world we live in. But they say the ancient Mesopotamians had Adamu, and then the Bible has Adam. Now, the difference between what the Bible says Adam was created for and the difference between Adamu, which is the first man, is this. So it seems like in the Bible, God wants to make people for them to be happy, for them to be good, to experience the joys of life, essentially. Adamu was created purely to be a servant for the gods. Now, there is a lot of speculation on where the Garden of Eden might have been. And if you saw the intro of my video here, I kind of said, was the Garden of Eden even on Earth? The reason why I say this is the only time that God seems to have a physical form was in the Garden of Eden. A lot of people ask me, what does that mean? They don't describe seeing God like, he looked like he had brown hair and a beard and he's wearing a toga. No one says that. But they do say that Adam and Eve hid because they could hear the footsteps of the Lord coming. Now, this goes back to what I said about the King James Bible, about things have been translated and changed. So if you look at Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 8, it says that they could hear the footsteps of the Lord walking through the garden. Sometimes it says, though, depending on what version of the Bible you have, it says they could hear the voice of the Lord in the garden. So, like I said, I feel like things have been changed throughout the Bible. Now, when they were talking about this, it's the only time that he had a physical presence. Because later on, I know he talked to them through a burning bush and stuff, but that was a communication device, kind of like when I call you on a cell phone. This, they could actually hear his steps coming to them in the garden. And then they were cast out of the Garden of Eden. I think when they were cast out, I think that it was a situation where, and this is my interpretation, where they were cast out of the Garden of Eden, and I do not think that was what we call today as Earth. I don't think that. I do believe in the ancient astronaut theory. You want to go down the Anunnaki route, and I'm not saying that would even disprove God or that would disprove the Mesopotamians. I'm saying, like, if you look at the ancient astronaut theory, they could all be true. They could all be correct at the end of the day. I don't want to touch this subject for a second because I know some people are going to get really upset without doing any kind of deep diving research on their own, or a lot of people are going to get really emotional when they're talking about this instead of talking about logic and facts and what we can find. And you can't talk about purely facts when you're talking about the Bible because we don't even know who wrote most of the Bible. Most of the Bible is written anonymously, and many of the books and chapters were found hundreds of years apart from each other and then hodgepodge back together in what we think is the best order of it. So the comparison that I'm going to make is this. Adamu was made to serve the gods. The Bible kind of paints this prettier picture of we're made to be happy and experience life and worship God. And to me, that's a hard pill to swallow because the creation of life, to me, feels like a science experiment. A lot of people say that it feels like, if that is real, if there was a God that made everything, it does feel like a science experiment. And the reason why I'm saying this is there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible about why we're even here in the first place. So we experiment as people. We experiment and make, different tests, and we try to create life in a petri jar and a petri dish. And that might be what we are. We might be life in a petri dish to some kind of cosmic entity. Okay. And that's where the Anunnaki theory and the human testing theories come in. And, even in the Bible, it talks about how the angels came down and mated with the humans. To me, that feels weird. And it says that the angels came down and mated with humans, because I'm like, what? What are angels? It never truly explains that in the Bible because they're supposedly God's servants. It says that we are God's creation and we're made in his image. So what are angels made in? Because it's not his image, apparently. Because it is very clear that angels seem to be very physical in nature, and they are not a spirit. It talks about it many times in the Bible that angels and demons can very much come down and touch us and be physical in this reality. And we're going to talk about some really supernatural stuff in a minute. And this is what always kind of grinds my gears is a lot of religious people of different religions, when you bring up ghosts and, I'm just throwing off the wall stuff here, vampires and werewolves and Bigfoots and all this different kind of stuff, they say, if any of that's real, it's all demons. And that couldn't be further than the truth. The Bible is very, very, very clear about different supernatural entities do exist on this earth that are not angels or demons. It does talk about Nephilim being like these half, mutated man beasts that were made with the angels. It talks about, the giants, which are, the Nephilim. Some people think that giants might have been their own race. It talks about Behemoth. It talks about Leviathan. It talks about cherubs. Cherubs, that's what was guarding the Garden of Eden. So Adam and Eve couldn't go back in there or couldn't get back to it. Was cherubs, which are described as horrific creatures. The original version of the Bible talks about Alaka, but then later in the King James version, it changes it to the word leech, which Alaka is in every other religion and every other ancient civilization in that area at the time. Alaka was a description of a modern day vampire, like to the T. It would follow people around. It would drain their blood. It would leech off their life. And it talks about that. It talks about witches in the Bible. It talks about spirits in the Bible. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that it talks about that is not just angels or demons. Like, so I always can't stand that argument. How does this tie into what we were talking about earlier with like Adamu and all the ancient alien theories? There's a lot of people that believe that a lot of our life here on Earth is native to Earth, and we are not. We don't fit the narrative of anything else that's here on this planet. There's nothing anywhere near our intelligence level, like not even close. There's nothing that has our capability of compounding knowledge. Humans as themselves are not that intelligent. Humans, our most special ability is that we can compound knowledge. So we can take the knowledge of our ancestors and reapply it in the future and compound upon that until it's better and better and better. If civilization reset right now, we're not that great. Like, None of you really can explain how your cell phone works. You all use a TV every day. You could never go out and build a TV on your own, like 99.9% of us. And if you do know how to do that stuff, it's because of the compounded knowledge that came before you. You never had to figure it out from scratch on your own. Even down to the basis of like how electricity works and how the internet works. Like if our civilization got wiped out right now and we reset on this earth, we would essentially be cavemen, because after a few generations, no one's going to know how to do anything at all, essentially. There's a whole anime you can watch called Dr. Stone. It's kind of like that. But my point is we don't know how many times our earth has been reset. We don't know if what we're being given is like the true facts of the matter of like where civilization came from, when it started from. So I'm going back. I kind of got off on a tangent there. It seems like almost all origin stories and religious stories of how they started and how they ended their religious stories are based upon this one central idea. And it's that there is a God, and that God brings his son to earth and makes him mortal / half mortal, and he either serves humankind or dies for humankind. And they are all like this. So there's obviously God and Jesus. There is Odin and Thor. And, Thor fights, battles for mankind. There is Zeus and Hercules. He loses a lot of his godhood, becomes a half mortal, does all of his, services here on earth. Like there's like all these Greek mythologies and these Christian stuff, and they all have the same kind of idea that there's a God. There's other big entities, in the Bible, we call them angels or demons, and we have Lucifer. In Greek mythology, we got Zeus, and instead of angels, we have other minor gods, and then we have Hades. Odin and Thor and Loki and all those, it's very much the same ways with Hela and everything else. It seems to all have the same balance scale and balance system, which makes me truly believe that ancient humans did see an event of some kind unfold, because how did all these religions spread apart by oceans and everything else come up with the same origin story, like every damn time? Like it's almost always the exact same story with just a little different variations. And it seems those variations are what are important to those cultures around the world. But the same general idea is what always persists. And when you really start breaking all of these different religions down and these different ideologies down, they're saying the same thing. Like I really think that people were seeing a cosmic event that they could not describe. And I'm going blank right now on the Indonesian religions and stuff. They talk about seeing their gods having wars in the sky. Christianity talks about how the angels had to go to war essentially with the people, the other angels that had mated with humans to make Nephilims, and then the Watchers had to stay behind on Earth and watch their Nephilim children fight to the death. Norse mythology is full of fights amongst their gods. Greek mythology is full of fights amongst their gods. In Christianity, you've got a God and angels, and the different angels have different things they're in charge of. Like St. Peter's and all this other stuff, and St. Michael. And then you go over to Greek mythology, and they have Zeus, and then he's got all these other guys doing the different sections. You have Apollo and Ares, and all these different people. Same thing with Norse mythology. They're all almost perfect mirror counterparts of each other. And none of them are devoid of human sacrifice. None of them are devoid of pure goodness. In all of the versions, God, Odin, Zeus, whatever you want to say, their lead god is jealous and wrathful and very violent, which leads a lot of people to believe that, like, for me, I grew up in Church of Christ, and I believe that the Old Testament Bible and the New Testament Bible, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, I believe truly that those were two different gods. Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim, those are all different names for God that were used in the same Bible. In the Bible, it talks about no other God should be put before me, which insinuates that he is recognizing that there is other gods. I truly believe that somewhere between the Old Testament and the New Testament God, there was a power shift in this war that it talks about happening. It talks about there being a war amongst angels and demons and everything else. If one of them was all powerful, there would not be a war. There would not be a way for there to be a power struggle. Lucifer was supposedly banished down to earth because he wanted God's power. He was envious of God's power. If he did not have the potential to steal that power, why would anybody But like, why would God even want to send him away? It does, to me, it doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense that we are taught that hell is a place where humans would get tortured, because if Lucifer is in charge of hell and the people that are there are kind of on his side more than they are the Lord's side, why would he want to be mean to the people that are essentially on his side? There's a lot of contradiction stuff with the Old Testament and New Testament. Old Testament God is ruthless, brutal, cold, and cruel. New Testament God seems to be like the God we all like to think of, the happy, the nice, the all acceptance, the merciful. New Testament God says it's never too late for your sins to be forgiven. Old Testament God murdered so many people. People always say violence is never the answer. Old Testament God said that violence is the answer like 99% of the time. He gave Samson the strength to kill 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. There wasn't a peaceful resolution. There wasn't a more humane way to get killed than being bludgeoned to death by a donkey's jawbone. Elijah in 2 Kings was essentially getting bullied, and he begged God for a curse where hungry she-bears would come out of the forest and maul youths. It doesn't ever describe if youths is literally children or adults, that are like teenagers essentially. Either way, these bears come out of there and maul a whole village full of essentially kids. They were just calling him fat and bald and telling him to go up, which just meant essentially go F yourself. In any court of law I've ever heard of, just saying, hey, go F yourself, you fat bald man, how does that justify killing approximately 40 children with the use of cursed bears? Does that sound like the God you were taught about in church? Because every church I've ever been to skips that chapter of 2 Kings every time. Because how do you explain it? And I don't think you can. Now, I want to get back on track here because it talks about Nephilims and angels mating with humans, and then there's these hybrid half-beasts. When we look at the story of Adam and Eve, they had children, and they had Cain and Abel, right? We all know that Cain killed Abel. Do you know what happened after Cain killed Abel? It gets real weird. He was banished. Abel was not killed. He was banished. And when he banished, it said that he was going to have to essentially take an accursed wife. And he was going to have to mate with the people that were already out in the world. He had to go live with these cursed people. Who is that? Who is that? Who is the cursed people that he had to go live with? What did they do? And would they not have been first if they were already cursed and put there? And this gets where I tie back into real life stuff, because we know that what we are today as humans is a mix of Homo sapien and Neanderthal. There's not a person alive that does not have at least 0.2% Neanderthal DNA in their body. No, science has never found anybody on this planet that has less than 0.2% Neanderthal DNA. Some people have 20 and 30% Neanderthal DNA. If y'all didn't know that, it's mind-blowing. Were those the Neanderthals and Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve, were those the Homo sapiens? Was that also what is kind of going back to the ancient astronaut theory of that we were planted here as a outside species on Earth, and there wasn't enough of us to mate with, so we had to mate with the closest thing to us in the wild, just like how when we see in certain areas when polar bears and grizzly bears cross territories, they'll make these hybrids. Was that what was happening? We don't know. We don't know, and we'll never know, but it is a stone cold fact that your DNA, if you go to that 23andMe or whatever it's called, will come back with a bare minimum of 0.2% Neanderthal DNA. There's never been an exception to this rule. There has been, I think, 30 humanoid species that have been on this planet besides us. So that's what gets to me next. Because I want to believe everything on the Bible. And it says that he created us in God's image. But it's very vague because it never at any point says that we are God's only creation. So it never says that we are God's only creation. Never, ever, ever, anywhere in the Bible does it say that. It says that we were created in his image. And people miscue that and say there can't be aliens. Why not? Because the Bible openly admits that God made seraphim, cherubim, and what we would call angels. So he created 3 other species that we know of that are arguably more intelligent than us when it comes to thinking. Arguably more intelligent than us. Why couldn't there be UFOs? Why couldn't there be aliens? Are the aliens we're seeing cherubim or seraphim? Because they are described as having being made of rings of light with eyes all over the rings. If you actually look at the description of a lot of the angels, it is absolutely terrifying. It's not like the little like robed person with the hair flowing with like the wings. It doesn't describe anything like that. And then like also it doesn't make sense to me that we're going to pretend that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and all that stuff was their actual names. No one was named that. If you don't know what their actual names were, then this is pretty much proven my point so far. So like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and all that stuff, you ought to say, I don't even know how to pronounce what the original name for Matthew was, but it literally changed languages 6 times. And every time it changed languages, they changed it to names that were ethnically like them because they wanted to be right. So, for short of a better word, if the name sounded African American, they would change it to a white person's name, essentially, if we wrote it in England, which is what happened. Matthew's real name in the Bible, and my name's Matthew, by the way. So, like, my parents were always like, oh, we named you after Matthew in the Bible. Well, that wasn't his name, so you didn't name me after nobody in the Bible. His actual name was like Matthew. It was like, it was not Matthew. There wasn't no John. I will say that Luke was actually like Laucus. So I guess that's like the most similar name they could find, but like, cause like Lucas, Laucus, pretty similar. But these names are like not even things that we can like really pronounce that great if you're like a, white person, English speaker like me. And that should speak a lot about how our future or our history has been changed a ton, is because we're going around parading things and I will say this, and people get mad at me for saying it, we whitewash so much of history, especially since history is made by like the winners of war. And, back then when the Crusades were going on and the kings of England and all these churches over in, France and Germany and English, they all wanted them to have like Catholic names essentially, which were the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and stuff. But they were not assigned those English names until about 200 AD. So we see that those names are first Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John around 200 AD, quite literally hundreds of years after much of the Bible was even written in the first place. Now, getting back on the aliens and, the Anunnaki and all this other stuff. So the oldest the oldest civilizations that we can find say that we come from star people. There's many Native American beliefs that we came from star people. And then in Christianity, we were made from a God that lives in the heavens, aka the stars. So once again, I'm agreeing that somebody might have saw the same thing, because most religions believe that like water is life, yet there's not really very many creation stories that start with life coming out of the water. Almost all of them come from the sky, which once again, you think about like the different settings and situations you're in, the commonality that every culture has is the sky, because not everybody lives next to the ocean, not everybody lives next to mountains. So I can see where that comes from. But the fact that multiple civilizations that have never touched each other all have the same story of a star person came down and taught us how to be what we are today, it's astounding. Like how many different civilizations have that same story. And then their history, like this is what's funny, because we pick and choose what we want to out of history and call it fact. All these civilizations talk about people came from the stars, taught us how to live, taught us technology, taught us stuff, and then a great flood happened. There are civilizations all over the world that almost perfectly match when the Great Flood happened. If you want to look at something else weird that they almost all match up, almost all written languages from all over the world are almost the exact same age old. So that means that humans were existing for an estimated tens of thousands of years. No one was writing shit down. And then out of nowhere one day, almost every civilization in the world was like, we better start writing stuff down. Let's come up with a thing called letters and numbers, and let's start like writing this stuff down and making a history for ourselves. So they all started doing that at the same time. And what's the first thing they all write about? Hey, we came from the stars. We got down here. Some civilizations say that they were brought here by the star people, where some civilizations say that we were already here and the star people taught them how to live. Either way, they both learned how to write and they start writing the same stuff. Now, all of these religions also start talking about how their God started mating with humans and making human hybrids. We know the book of Enoch was purposely removed from the Bible. And the book of Enoch, everybody always wants to jump on that. Well, we can't tell who wrote that. It's anonymous. So is almost every other book of the Bible, just so you know. Like, almost every book of the Bible is completely anonymous. On if you look at the roots of who wrote it, we don't know for the most part. Okay, it has to do with the locations we found them at, the dating of the papers, the chain line of events. If you really want to look down how the book of the Bible was put together, it gets very confusing very fast because it is not a linear timeline whatsoever. The Bible has been added and taken away from so many times it's not even funny, and it actually specifically says in the Bible to never add or take away from the Bible. Yet that was wrote in one chapter of a book that was not put with the rest of the book yet. So did that apply to that one book of the Bible or the whole thing? And what is the definition of the whole thing? We don't know. I'm getting off on my tangent again about this. But like I was saying, they all have beliefs that human hybrids were being made from angels or gods mating with the populace here. So we see in ancient Egyptians, we've got like, the sun gods and all these different gods that are rulers, like the Nile crocodile god and all this stuff. In Christianity, we have the Book of Enoch, which was purposely omitted, partly because most of the Book of Enoch was not found until the 1950s. We had like 2/3 of the Book of Enoch, but the rest of it was not found until the 1950s. If you get an Ethiopian Bible, you can still read part of the Book of Enoch before they took it out. The reason why the Book of Enoch was omitted, and I'm gonna tell you some hard facts that it's going to be hard to hear for the Christian people that do not want to change their beliefs on anything. King James was a horrible person that headed up what we know as what would become the witch hunts, the famous witch hunts and the witch trials. King James was both fascinated and terrified of magic. Absolutely scared the holy living shit out of him. If anybody in his kingdom was suspected of doing magic, they could be burned, they could be hung, they could be tortured, they could be killed, whatever the case is. So the Book of Enoch talks about how the reason why we had the great flood in the first place with Noah was because the angels and the Nephilim were teaching humans magic. God is very clear in the Bible that he does not want anybody having his kind of power. That's the reason why Lucifer got sent to hell, or earth, whatever you want to call it. It's very clear about that God is a jealous God. So if angels are teaching these sacred arts and magic, then God is going to be unhappy with it. And he created the flood to wipe out the Nephilim. And he made them go to war with each other to wipe themselves out. But he also, I feel like, wanted to erase the humans that knew magic. It talks about this in every other religion as well. Like, just go down the list here. You're going to see this same trend here. Norse mythology had magic. The Greeks were full of magic. It's all full of magic everywhere you look. And the Bible is even full of magic. It talks about there being magicians. It talks about there being a witch. Like, it doesn't stop talking about magic further on, but it very briefly touches on it, where the Book of Enoch was like all about it. And that might have been the reason why the Great Flood happened, because I've always wondered, what did people do so wrong that justified a Great Flood? And when the Book of Enoch is in the Bible right after the Book of Genesis is where the Book of Enoch should have been, or like kind of intermingled in there, it makes a lot more sense. It makes like tons more sense. You can go read the Book of Enoch online because, like I said, the majority of it was found before 1950s, but a lot of it was found, I think, 1953 or something. It will never be put in a modern day version of the Bible, I don't believe, because it was so modernly found, which is another major problem that I have with like all like science and history. We find stuff out in modern day time, and we don't want to change textbooks and stuff immediately. Like we can find something out for fact, and we'll still teach our kids the wrong math, science, history for like decades before we alter it and change it. It's very frustrating if they change it whatsoever. It's like to be in a history book, it's got to have been discovered a long time ago or something. It doesn't make sense. But going back to these demigod / human hybrids and all this other stuff, they all have a very similar start. More weird similarities between the Anunnaki and like the Bible is the lust for gold. Okay, did you know like scientifically humans should not think that gold or diamonds are valuable? Gold and diamonds have almost no value. Now, gold has more value than diamonds does because of its use in like technology now, which is what we're going to get into, because like a lot of modern computer chips will use like little gold flake and stuff, and it's a very good conductor. But a lot of diamonds, there's like 4 or 5 families that control the whole diamond industry, if you didn't know. So diamonds shouldn't actually be rare. There's actually a lot of other precious minerals that are more rare than diamonds that are worth way less, because those five families control the flow and the prices of all diamonds, and they tell us that they're really expensive, and it's just fake. It's just a fraud. So the Anunnaki originally said, or it's said that the Anunnaki created humans to labor and get them gold. There's been multiple reasons of why they needed the gold. One, it's what they needed for something to survive in our atmosphere. The other one is that it's what they needed to survive in their own atmosphere, and they can spray gold flake into their atmosphere, and somehow it like makes their atmosphere livable wherever they come from. And supposedly Anunnaki would have been physically weak, so they needed laborers like us to dig and mine and farm the gold out, essentially. How does that sound similar to the Bible at all? Okay, well, in the Bible, there's something called the Ark of the Covenant, which is supposed to be the housing unit for the, like it's supposed to hold the spirit of like God in it. So the Ark of the Covenant was supposedly a device used to be able to be like the throne of Yahweh or to move his presence. Now, what did I say about the Anunnaki? They supposedly needed gold to survive in our atmosphere. So was this how the Anunnaki were being moved around on our planet? Or were they making us slave humans move them around in these like gold chambers of these Ark of the Covenants? Because to me, if God is a spirit, right, or like some kind of malevolent force, he doesn't need to be transported around in this thing. Yet that Ark of the Covenant supposedly existed for that reason, and it was strictly forbidden to open it. Okay, but the Anunnaki supposedly needed gold. Now the Anunnaki would have been a lot more technologically advanced than us, and now we find out in modern like computers that gold is like the best thing we can use for microcomputer chips. So do they really need it for their atmosphere, or is that what we understood it as? And because we couldn't comprehend technology because we didn't know shit about shit, and what they needed it for was all their technology back on their home planet, and maybe they had exhausted all of their gold resources, so now they're using us to mine ours, and now we are essentially a leftover civilization that was originally like a mining town or a mining planet, if you will. And that's why gold prices are still so highly controlled, and you have all these conspiracies about Fort Knox, and Fort Knox supposedly holds all the U.S. gold, but I've personally been to Fort Knox. Many people have been there. There's not gold in those safes anymore. So are we still giving up like a big gold amount to the Anunnaki, and our presidential leaders have meetings with them, and world leaders have meetings with them, and we're all just donating them gold, and we're just left with like the scraps of it or whatever? I don't know. That's just a theory that's out there. But getting back to the other religions too, gold is important in like every religion ever. But why? We shouldn't have even known that gold was down in the ground and to think it was valuable. So at first, gold was done the way you kind of like imagine like the California gold rush, where people were like, panning it out in rivers and finding it on the surface, but it was extremely small amounts. But literally like 2,000 years ago, we were mining 100 or more feet under the ground looking for gold when we would have had no real use for it, like besides purely decoration. And yeah, maybe people just wanted it that bad. But who told us that it was valuable in the first place? Like when you think about humans and us not knowing about anything, like today we know that like gold and silver and all this stuff is worth a lot because we're conditioned to think that way. But there would have been a lot more precious resources to them that would have been actually useful, that you'd have thought was more like wanted than that. But both the Anunnaki and other religions out there and, Church of Christ, it is always talked about, with Christianity, that gold was valuable even a long time ago, and it's always been used for offerings and stuff. Why did every civilization around the world that did not communicate with each other, we're talking about even over North and South America, come up with the same resource was that valuable? It was the most valuable thing we got. Is this gold? Why? There's so many other things that people could have decorated with, but gold was always the most important. And I can only think it's because they were being told by something else it was the most important. This next theory of why like maybe we don't have contact with Anunnaki anymore is pretty neat, and it's kind of scary, honestly. So have you ever watched the show Falling Skies? It's a pretty neat show. It's kind of cheesy at times, but it's got some good theories in there. And it's the fact that the reason why we don't see the Anunnaki anymore is, how our planet is moving in a solar system that's moving in a universe? Their universe and their solar system might be moving as well. And our planets are only close enough to travel back and forth every few thousand years. So in between those few thousand years, we don't see or hear from them. That's just a theory that's out there. It's one that I'm like kind of on the fence about, but it makes sense because we know that like sometimes we get physically closer to other planets in our solar system, and sometimes we're on the opposite sides of the solar system, but every once in a while we get close together. And in theory, if our traveling was better, that would be the perfect time to cross over to different planets if we had better technology, and which they would obviously have if any of this is real. So that does make sense to me. Just don't know if I fully buy into it. Another reason why I believe that early humans were being told something by a real cosmic god or Anunnaki, aliens, whatever you want to say, all of these origin stories, all three of the ones that I've been talking about and hitting on a bunch, all say that there was a great flood in their past. But weirder yet, they all say that the next time that the world ends, it will end in fire. So Ragnarok is the Norse belief, talks about how there will be a great fire. In the Bible, it says the next time that God destroys the earth, it will be with fire. In Greek mythology, it says that there will be a great fire caused by essentially man. It will be a great war that we wage upon ourselves, which I think could be the prediction of like nuclear bombs or something. But they all three have a end of days story that ends with fire, and they all three have a story of kind of like a reset creation with a great flood. They all came to the same conclusion. They all had a god that had a son that did stuff in the mortal world. Like, there's all like minor gods or angels in all three versions that are over the dominion of different things. There's all a version of hell. There's all a leader of the dominion of hell. After hearing all this stuff, guys, I don't know how any of us can disagree that somebody was given the same script and they maybe have just been playing the telephone game, and throughout time, as people spread across the earth, we have these branching religions that are really just saying the same thing as everybody else is saying. We even share common holidays, like Christmas and Easter were both like Norse-based religions and like Germanic tribe-based religions, religious holidays. So we share a lot of the same commonalities. That's why I'm saying I believe all of it is just branching like trees. Like we're all branches off the same tree is what I'm trying to say here. And we are so quick in this day and age to point fingers. Oh, this is wrong. Or this is wrong. No. We're all saying the same thing. Like literally all three of those religions we've been hitting on say, be good, don't be bad. If you're bad, go to hell. If you're good, you get to go to that version of heaven. And there's somebody you're supposed to be praising. There's somebody you're supposed to be fearing and, staying away from. They're all saying the same stuff. Like they're all saying the same thing. And the part that I have a hard time getting over is the timelines of these things. Almost every major religion has gone through this same cycle of being founded and being ostracized, and you could be killed for even believing that, to this next stage where it's gaining popularity and it's acceptable, to the stage that it gets violent. Okay, every religion has done this, where at some point they think they are so right and they have so many followers that they kill everyone else around them. Christianity did it with the Crusades. They did it up worse than anybody. The Crusades raged for hundreds of years. So many, countless people were killed over the Crusades, right? I don't remember there being any part in the Bible where it said kill the people who ain't believing the same way. Now you get into the stuff with different parts of like being Muslim and the violence that has gone on there for a long time. You talk about Greek mythology, how the Romans themselves, the whole civilization was at war essentially the whole time they ever existed. And they thought forcing their religion on other people was the right thing to do. And then when you talk about Norse mythology, it's literally based upon violence. It's literally like you die on the battlefield. That is the best thing that can happen to you. Another hard thing to wrap my mind around. And if you're a believer in the Bible, and if you guys don't know this, I believe the Bible. I really do. I really do. I'm also not saying that because I believe it, I think the other ones are wrong either. I believe them as well. Okay. I don't think that one has to be true and the other ones are not. If you haven't made it this far in the video, I'm sure you're going in the comments blowing up already. But before 200 BC, the modern idea of hell did not exist. In fact, the Jewish religion is what Christianity, derives from. And when you look at Judaism, they thought that both good and bad people both went to the shadow place because the idea of heaven and hell wasn't even talked about yet. The Bible wasn't made yet. So what happened to people? What was the rule there? Was it just a general idea of hey, be good or hey, be bad? Because apparently it didn't matter. They called it the gray area, the silent area, the shadow land. Now, what 99% of you believe in when you think of hell, like what you're picturing in your head of there being fire and brimstones and a devil overlooking the torture and all this crazy stuff, actually comes from a book that was written in the 1300s called Dante's Inferno, which is still popular in pop culture today. There's a video game made about it like 10 years ago. There's been modern books rewritten. But Dante's Inferno was where the modern idea of hell comes from. It was such a highly popular book back then that it was like, I mean, books weren't even everywhere yet. That book was everywhere. Like if you read in the 1300s, you knew what Dante's Inferno was and you read it, okay? And if you didn't, you watched a play be acted out about it and told about in public squares, which was the public way to read books, by the way. I don't know if you guys know that, but most people couldn't read back then. So a dude would literally go to the middle of like the town square and just start reading a book out loud, and people would just hang around and listen. Like that's how a lot of people read books, was like essentially the old fashioned way of an audiobook. Yeah. So Dante's Inferno was everywhere, and it shaped a lot of modern ideas we have about Christianity. Like, for example, did you know the rapture? The rapture is not mentioned in the Bible at all. Revelation's mentioned. The rapture is never mentioned. The whole idea that there will be like just everybody disappears and the bad people get left behind on earth, that is not in the Bible. That's a pop culture thing. Actually, the word rapture, like I said, is not used at all, but the idea of it is in there. It talks about, people rising up that are on the earth, but it talks about the dead also coming up to meet Christ then, that were believers. So where are they in the meantime? Is this why we have ghosts? Is this why we have spirits? The Bible actually contradicts itself a couple times on what happens right when you die. Some parts of the Bible say that it kind of insinuate that you would go immediately. Some parts of the Bible insinuate that you're in a waiting period in between, because it actually says in the Bible, the dead do not know that they are even dead. So, okay. The next thing is, if you're going to go to hell, I think the way it reads is you might go to hell until the rapture happens, the revelation happens, and then you just cease to exist, because it talks about getting thrown into a lake of fire, or what is also known as the second death. I don't know. There's a lot of gray areas out there. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it kind of opens your minds to think about things in a different light, in a different way. And be a little bit more acceptance of others and their beliefs, and to hear each other out. It's very important to have these conversations with facts and knowledge instead of just emotions. So many people that I talk to that I want to try to intelligently talk to about this will just instantly get mad at you and be like, no. And they're just blind mad, and they don't even know why. And when you get to talking to them, they actually don't know most of the things you brought up that are actually in the Bible. Like, if you guys didn't know a ton of the facts I brought up about the Bible today, I think that's awesome that I taught you a little bit about the Bible. I love teaching people about the Bible. I love learning about the Bible. You're not going to out-Bible me. I've read the thing a million times. I know what it says front to back, okay? But I think it's very important to have open conversations, because we don't know everything. The Bible was not delivered to earth from God or from Jesus. It was written by man. It was influenced by leaders who were corrupt, and we know this. A lot of things we know had to be written in code, like Jonah and the whale was a code message of where to take a ship that would take you to a safe passage where you could openly practice Christianity. If y'all didn't know that, boom, that's a banger for you, because it's very specific on where Jonah gets swallowed by the whale and where he gets spit out by the whale. Back then, you could get killed and persecuted for believing in Christianity and talking about God. So what they would do is they would put these parables in there that would be like, Jonah got swallowed by the whale at XYZ, and he was spit out over here, and Daniel went this way, Daniel went that way. Like, if you ever hear very specific locations mentioned, it was for people, kind of like the Underground Railroad when people were escaping slavery in the United States. It was very much a way of saying, like, here's a funny story or here's a cool story, but what it's secretly code for is you go there, somebody will be there to take you to safe passage over here. Like, that's what it was for. Like, that's what it was about. So if you made it this far, you're at least somewhat interested in what I had to say. So if you want to follow the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, it's called Matt from Nomads. On Facebook, we are Nomads Animal Encounter. If you only have TikTok or like to watch there, it's also Nomads Animal Encounter. Please watch there the least. It helps us out the least. TikTok is wanting to censor a ton of our videos. And then on YouTube, it's Nomads Animal Reserve. So I'd love to see you at any of the following platforms. There are links in the comments.